The sun was a molten brand on the vast, unforgiving canvas of the Arizona Territory, searing the parched earth until it cracked like old leather, each fissure a silent testament to the relentless siege of heat and drought. Dust devils, like restless pale ghosts, danced in the shimmering haze that distorted the distant, jagged peaks of the Dragoon Mountains, their ephemeral forms mirroring the fragility of life in this raw, untamed land. It was here, nestled in a shallow valley carved by a seasonal creek that was now little more than a whisper of damp sand, that John Carver had staked his claim. His dream of a cattle ranch wrestled from the wilderness with sweat, blood, and an unyielding stubbornness that was as much a part of him as the calluses on his hands. His wife, Sarah, a woman whose gentle spirit seemed an ill fit for the harshness of their surroundings, yet bloomed with a quiet resilience, had brought a semblance of softness to their rough-hewn cabin. Her laughter, a rare melody against the constant sigh of the wind. And there was Ethan, their 7-year-old son, a boy with his mother's bright, curious eyes and his father's sturdy frame, his small world bounded by the corrals, the whispering cottonwoods along the creek bed, and the endless, sun-bleached horizon. Ethan was a child of the silence and the immensity, his days filled with the small adventures of boyhood, tracking lizards, mimicking the cry of the red-tailed hawk that circled lazily overhead, and listening, wide-eyed, to his father's gruffly told stories of the world beyond their valley. On that fateful morning, the air was unnaturally still, heavy with an unspoken premonition that pricked at the edges of Sarah's awareness like a thorn. John had ridden out before dawn to check a distant waterhole, leaving Sarah and Ethan to their morning chores. Ethan was attempting to coax a shy calf back towards its mother, his small face screwed up in concentration, his laughter tinkling like a distant bell when the calf finally nudged his hand, a brief, innocent moment of connection before the world shattered. They came not with the thunder of a cavalry charge, but with the chilling stealth of shadows detaching themselves from the landscape, a dozen Chiricahua Apache warriors, their faces grim, their movements fluid and purposeful, emerging from the very rocks and scrub that had seemed so benign moments before. Sarah screamed, a raw, primal sound swallowed by the indifferent expanse, shoving Ethan behind her, her body a fragile shield. The raid was brutal, swift, and terrifyingly efficient. The warriors were not after plunder, not primarily. Their eyes, like chips of obsidian, were fixed on the boy. Ethan saw his mother fall, a crimson flower blooming on her calico dress, her eyes wide with a terror that would haunt his waking and sleeping hours for years uncounted. He felt himself snatched up, a rough hand clamped over his mouth, his small fists beating uselessly against a chest as hard as sun-baked clay. He saw the familiar cabin, the porch swing Sarah loved, the world he knew, receding with horrifying speed, replaced by the stench of sweat, horses, and an alien, guttural language that was the sound of his nightmare made real. John Carver returned at dusk to a scene of unimaginable horror. The silence that greeted him was a living thing, coiling in his gut, tightening his throat. He found Sarah where she had fallen, her hand outstretched as if reaching for their son. The world, his world, tilted and broke. The grief that engulfed him was a physical force, a maelstrom that threatened to tear him apart, leaving behind only a hollow shell. He tracked them, of course, with a fury born of despair, pushing himself and his horse to the brink of collapse, following the faint traces left by the warriors, his heart a leaden weight, his mind a canvas of his son's terrified face. But the Apache were masters of their domain, vanishing into the labyrinthine canyons and desolate plains as if they were spirits of the land itself. Days turned into weeks, hope dwindling with each fruitless sunrise. The official search parties, dispatched with reluctant sympathy by the distant fort, eventually gave up, muttering about the futility, about the boy being better off dead than raised a savage. But John Carver never gave up. Not entirely. The fire of his rage banked, but the embers of a desperate, painful hope glowed dimly in the desolate landscape of his soul. Sarah's grave, marked by a simple wooden cross beneath the largest cottonwood, became his only confidant. He spoke to her in the quiet hours of the night, his voice raw with unshed tears, his promises to find Ethan growing fainter with each passing year, each season that turned without word, without sign. The ranch survived, a testament to his grim determination, but it was a hollow place, filled with ghosts and the aching void of Ethan's absence. John became a man carved from the same unyielding rock as the mountains that surrounded him, his words few, his eyes holding a permanent shadow of loss. He was a solitary figure, respected for his toughness, pitied for his tragedy, but truly known by none. The years piled up like autumn leaves, burying the raw edges of his grief under a layer of stoic acceptance, or so it seemed to the outside world. But beneath the surface, the wound remained, a festering sorrow that time could not heal, only numb. He grew old with the land, his hair turning the color of winter frost, his shoulders stooped from the weight of unspoken burdens. 20 years. 2 decades of silence, of wondering, of a pain so profound it had become a part of his very breathing. The world had moved on. The territory was slowly being tamed. New settlers arrived with fresh hopes, but John Carver remained tethered to that one horrific day, a man living in the long, dark shadow of a love lost and a son stolen by the wind and the silence of the desert. He'd heard whispers over the years, brought by traders or frightened prospectors, tales of a white captive among the Chiricahua, one who had not only survived but thrived. But he dismissed them as cruel fictions, mirages in his desert of despair. What man, what boy, could endure such a sundering and not be utterly broken or utterly changed beyond recognition, beyond reclamation? The sun, that same relentless, unforgiving sun, continued its daily journey across the vast Arizona sky, a silent, eternal witness to the dramas of men, their triumphs, their tragedies, and the faint, almost imperceptible threads of fate that sometimes, against all odds, wove a pattern of return. The initial shock of capture was a raw, screaming terror that threatened to consume young Ethan entirely. Wrenched from everything he knew, from the scent of his mother's baking and the rough comfort of his father's hand, he was thrust into a world of harsh sounds, alien faces, and the constant, thrumming fear of the unknown. The Chiricahua warriors, the Ende, the people as they called themselves, were not the monsters of settlers' nightmares, but they were hard men, their lives a testament to survival in a land that offered little quarter. Ethan, renamed Bike Hoshuni, or He Who Walks in Beauty, a name given perhaps in irony or in some nascent hope by an old woman named Nalin, gentle dear, whose eyes held a flicker of sorrowful understanding, cried, until his small body ached and his throat was raw. Nalin, whose own son had been lost to the sickness brought by the white eyes, took him under her care, not with overt affection, for that was not always their way, but with a practical kindness that saved him. She fed him, clothed him in soft deerskin, and spoke to him in the flowing, musical cadence of the Ende tongue, a language that slowly, painfully, began to seep into his consciousness, displacing the English words that were now only echoes of a fading dream. The early years were a brutal crucible. He was an outsider, the white-eyes child, a curiosity and sometimes a target for the other children's taunts and rough play. He learned to be quick, to be watchful, to suppress the tears that brought only scorn. He missed his father with an ache so profound it felt like a physical hollowness in his chest, a constant companion in the lonely nights spent huddled in Nalin's wickiup, the sounds of the Apache camp a strange, unsettling lullaby. He clutched a small, smooth stone he'd had in his pocket the day he was taken, a tangible link to his lost world, rubbing it until it was warm, whispering his old name, Ethan, into its unhearing surface. But children are resilient, adaptable creatures, and the wilderness, for all its harshness, has its own compelling beauty, its own lessons. Under the tutelage of Kaalte, strong arm, a grizzled warrior whose stern demeanor hid a deep well of wisdom and a surprising patience for the captured boy, Ethan began to learn. Coyote saw something in the boy's fierce, frightened eyes, a spark of the same resilience that defined his own people. He taught Ethan to ride like the wind, to move silently through the brush, to read the signs of the earth and the sky. He learned to hunt, not with the casual sport of some white men, but with a deep respect for the animal that gave its life so the people might live. He learned the stories of the Nd, the ancient tales of Usen, the creator, of white-painted woman, and of the trickster coyote, stories that wove a rich tapestry of meaning and connection to the world around him. His body hardened, his senses sharpened. The sun that had once seemed an enemy now browned his skin, and the wind that had carried his mother's last cry now whispered secrets to him. The memories of his past life did not vanish, but they became softer, dreamlike, like looking at a familiar landscape through a shimmering heat haze. The image of his mother's face, the sound of his father's voice, the feel of the rough wooden planks of their cabin porch beneath his bare feet, these things receded, overlaid by the urgent, vibrant reality of his new existence. He began to understand the Nd's fierce love for their land, their desperate struggle to preserve their way of life against the relentless encroachment of the white settlers, the Nd, the metal-eyed people, who seemed to fear and despise everything the Apache held sacred. He saw their courage, their loyalty to kin, their deep spiritual connection to the natural world. There were moments of profound conflict, of course. Times when a chance word, a familiar scent, or a fleeting dream would bring the ghost of his past rushing back, leaving him disoriented and filled with a nameless sorrow. He saw the brutality of Apache raids, the fear in the eyes of other captives, and a part of him, the Ethan that still flickered deep within, recoiled. But he also saw the suffering of the people, the broken treaties, the shrinking hunting grounds, the relentless pursuit by the pony soldiers. He was caught between two worlds, belonging to neither, yet slowly, inexorably, being forged by one. As he grew into young manhood, Bike Hozhuni, or Taja, Soaring Hawk, as he became known for his keen sight and swiftness, earned his place among the Nde. He was no longer just the captive boy, but a skilled hunter, a fearless warrior, his courage tempered with a thoughtfulness that impressed the elders. Coyote, now aging, saw in him a future leader, one who understood not only the ways of the people, but also, perhaps, the ways of the enemy, a dangerous but potentially valuable knowledge. Taja learned to speak little of his past, to bury the English words deep within him, but he never discarded the small, smooth stone, a silent reminder of a life almost forgotten. He learned the discipline of silence, the power of observation, the Nde way of valuing actions far above words. He found a camaraderie among the young warriors, a sense of belonging that soothed the persistent ache of his early losses. He even found a fragile kind of love with a young woman named Ishkene. Singing Reed, whose laughter was as gentle as the rustling of leaves, and whose eyes saw not the white captive, but the strong, earnest man he was becoming. Yet, even as he rose in stature, even as he led warriors with a wisdom that belied his years, a shadow of otherness clung to him, a subtle dissonance that only he and perhaps Nalan and Coyote truly perceived. He was of the people, yet not entirely. The blood of the settlers flowed in his veins, a secret river beneath the sun-browned skin, a constant, silent murmur that spoke of a destiny yet unfulfilled, a reckoning yet to come. The death of Coyote, not in battle but from a wasting sickness, marked a turning point. The old warrior, on his deathbed, had looked at Taja with eyes that seemed to pierce through to his very soul. "You walk two paths, Soaring Hawk," he had rasped, his voice thin as a reed. "The spirits have woven your blanket with threads of different colors. Do not fear the pattern. It is your strength." And then, with the tribe facing renewed pressure from the expanding settlements and the ever-present threat of the cavalry, the Council of Elders, after much deliberation, chose Taja to be one of their war leaders, a voice to guide them through the perilous times ahead. He was a man now, forged in the fires of loss and adaptation, his heart, Apache, his memories, a haunting, fragmented song of a world he thought he had left behind forever. He was Soaring Hawk, a leader of the ND, but deep inside, a small, 7-year-old boy named Ethan still clutched a smooth stone, wondering if the wind would ever carry him home, or if home was now simply the vast, indifferent sky under which his people, his chosen people, fought for their survival. 2 decades had etched themselves onto the face of John Carver like ravines on a canyon wall, each line a testament to grief, endurance, and the slow erosion of hope. The ranch, once a vibrant testament to his youthful ambition, now bore the patina of neglect and sorrow, its fences sagging, its fields less bountiful, mirroring the weariness in its owner's soul. He was a man who had conversed more with ghosts than with living men for many years, the memory of Sarah's smile and Ethan's laughter the only warmth in his desolate existence. The Arizona territory had changed around him. Towns had sprung up, the railroad snaked its iron way across the plains, and the Indian problem, as the newspapers termed it, was said to be nearing its brutal, final solution. Yet, for John, time had remained stubbornly fixed on that one terrible afternoon. He still scanned the horizon at dusk, a habit ingrained so deeply it was instinctual, half expecting to see a small figure trudging home, a habit that brought a fresh stab of pain each time reality asserted itself. The rumors of the Apache moving south, driven by starvation and the relentless blue-coated soldiers, had reached even his isolated valley, carried on the dry winds, along with the scent of dust and distant sage. He'd paid them little mind, his dealings with any Apache band in the past being fleeting, tense, and best avoided. His world had shrunk to the boundaries of his land, his heart to the small fenced-off plot where Sarah lay at peace. Then came the day when a rider, a nervous young man from the fledgling settlement of Redemption, 20 miles east, galloped in, his horse lathered, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Mr. Carver, sir," he'd stammered. "There's Apaches, a whole band, camped by the Two Forks crossing. They ain't raiding, not yet. They sent a messenger. They want to parley. Their leader, he speaks English, some say. They're asking for safe passage, maybe trade." John had merely grunted, his face impassive. Another problem for others to solve. But the young man persisted. "They say their leader, he's different. Not like the others. Some are saying, well, it's just talk, but..." He trailed off, unnerved by Carver's cold stare. John felt a familiar weariness, a disinterest in the squabbles of the wider world. Yet, something in the young man's hesitant description, the emphasis on a leader who was different, pricked at a deeply buried nerve. He agreed to ride to Redemption, more out of a sense of grim duty to his neighbors, who still looked to him as a man of experience, than any real interest. The meeting was set for the neutral ground, beyond the town's meager stockade, under a sky the color of faded denim, the sun already beginning its descent, painting the western clouds in hues of blood, orange, and bruised purple. The settlers were a nervous, heavily armed crowd, their faces a mixture of bravado and thinly veiled fear. John Carver stood apart, his old Winchester cradled in his arms, his eyes, pale and cold as a winter sky, scanning the Apache delegation as they approached. They were a proud, wary group, their movements economical, their expressions unreadable. At their head rode a man who immediately commanded attention. He was tall for an Apache, his frame lean and powerful, his bearing regal despite the worn deerskin and simple adornments. His black hair, long and straight, was held back by a beaded headband. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, his eyes, dark and piercing, missing nothing. It was these eyes that snagged John's attention, holding it with an intensity that was almost physical. There was an intelligence there, a profound weariness, and something else. Something unplaceably, disturbingly familiar that made the old rancher's heart stumble in his chest. The Apache leader dismounted, his movements fluid, and began to speak, his voice surprisingly deep, measured, the English words accented but clear, carrying across the charged silence. He spoke of his people's plight, of the need for peace, for a small piece of land where they could live without fear, without starvation. He spoke with a dignity that belied the desperation of their situation. John listened, his gaze fixed on the speaker, a strange, unwelcome turmoil stirring within him. It was absurd, a trick of the light, of an old man's grieving mind. And yet, the way the man held his head, a slight, almost imperceptible tilt when he was considering his words, a fleeting gesture of his hand brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. These were phantoms, echoes from a lifelong dead. Then, the Apache leader, whose name was spoken as Ta-ja by his companions, paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled settlers, lingering for a heartbeat on John Carver. For a moment, their eyes met, and in that fathomless, dark gaze, John saw not the alien warrior, but a flicker, a mere spark, of something lost, something precious. As the parley continued, tense and fraught with suspicion, Taja reached to adjust a small pouch at his belt. From it, a glint of metal, something catching the dying sun. John's breath caught in his throat. It was a locket, a small, silver locket, tarnished with age, intricately carved with a pair of doves. The very locket he had given Sarah on their first anniversary, the locket she had always worn, the locket that had been missing, along with their son, 20 years ago. The world seemed to stop. The voices around him faded to a distant murmur. The air grew thick, unbreathable. He saw Sarah's face, smiling, placing that same locket around Ethan's neck for safekeeping when he was playing, just days before. His legs felt weak, his vision swam. He took a step forward, then another, his hand outstretched, a choked sound escaping his lips. Ethan? The name was a whisper, a prayer, a sound torn from the deepest recesses of his shattered heart. Ta-ja, Soaring Hawk, froze, his stoic composure, so carefully maintained, fractured. His eyes, those dark Apache eyes, widened, and in their depths, a maelstrom of emotions swirled. Confusion, shock, a dawning, terrible recognition. The English name, a name he had not heard spoken aloud in 2 decades, a name he had buried under layers of nude identity, struck him with the force of a physical blow. He looked at the old, weathered white man before him, at the raw agony and desperate hope etched on his face, and saw not just another settler, but a ghost from a life he had almost managed to forget. The locket, his mother's locket, suddenly felt like a burning coal against his skin. The years collapsed, the 2 decades vanishing like smoke in the wind, and for a shattering moment, he was that terrified 7-year-old boy again, his world ripped apart. The silence that fell was absolute, broken only by John Carver's ragged breathing and the distant, mournful cry of a lone coyote, a fitting soundtrack to a reunion so impossible, so fraught with pain in the immense, unbridgeable chasm of time and experience. It felt less like a miracle and more like the beginning of a new, more complex kind of agony. The revelation hung in the air like the charged stillness before a desert thunderstorm, thick with disbelief and the raw, exposed nerves of 2 shattered pasts colliding. For Taja, the Apache leader known as Soaring Hawk, the name Ethan was a key unlocking a floodgate of suppressed memories. The scent of pine soap his mother used, the rough texture of his father's beard against his cheek, the comforting weight of a patchwork quilt. These images, once faded to near oblivion, now surged forth with a clarity that was both agonizing and strangely, terrifyingly alluring. He saw the old rancher, John Carver, his face a mask of incredulous hope and profound sorrow, and recognized the ghost of the strong, vital man who had been his father. For John, the sight of the locket, followed by that flicker of recognition in Taja's eyes, was like a physical blow, knocking the wind from him, yet simultaneously igniting a spark in the cold embers of his heart that he'd thought long extinguished. The other settlers and Apache warriors watched in stunned silence, the initial purpose of their parley forgotten, replaced by attention far more personal, far more volatile. Taja, regaining a measure of his hard-won composure, did not immediately acknowledge the name nor the man. His Ned upbringing, the years of discipline and stoicism, asserted itself. He was a leader of his people, their safety and future his paramount responsibility. He could not, would not, crumble before them, before the enemy. Yet, the tremor in his hand, as he instinctively touched the locket at his belt, was undeniable. John Carver, oblivious to the wider audience, took another halting step forward. "Ethan, my son, is it truly you?" His voice was hoarse, breaking with emotion. The Apache warriors tensed, their hands moving towards their weapons, misinterpreting the old man's desperate advance. Taja raised a hand, a subtle, commanding gesture that stilled his men. He looked at John, his dark eyes searching, probing, filled with a conflict that mirrored the turmoil in his own soul. "The boy you speak of died many winters ago," Taja said, his voice low and steady, the English words carefully chosen, yet carrying a weight of unspoken history. It was a denial, yet not entirely. It was a statement of fact from one perspective, the perspective of Soaring Hawk. John's face fell, the nascent hope flickering like a dying candle. "No, the locket. Sarah's locket," he whispered, his gaze fixed on the small piece of silver. Taja's fingers closed around it. It was a gift from one who showed kindness to a lost child. He offered no more, the wall of his Apache identity firmly in place, but the subtext, the things unsaid, hung heavy between them. The parley, strained and unproductive before, now seemed impossible. Suspicion radiated from the settlers. If this Apache leader was truly John Carver's long-lost son, then what did that mean? Was he a Trojan horse? A savage merely pretending to seek peace? From the Apache side, there was confusion and a dawning unease. Their leader, Soaring Hawk, a man they respected, a man they had chosen, now stood accused, in a way, of a past that made him other. Over the next few days, an uneasy truce held, a fragile membrane over a simmering volcano. Taja, or Ethan as John Carver desperately wanted to call him, agreed to further talks, not in the open, but more discreetly, with John and a few select elders from the town. He did this not for the shattered man who claimed to be his father, he told himself, but for his people, who were starving, who needed a respite, a chance. Their meetings were fraught with unspoken emotions, with the ghosts of shared and separate pasts. John, with a desperate hunger, tried to bridge the chasm of 20 years, speaking of Sarah, of the ranch, of the life Ethan had lost. Taja listened, his face a stoic mask, but his eyes, those windows to a soul torn, sometimes betrayed a flicker of pain, of longing, of a confusion so profound it was almost palpable. He spoke little of his life with the Ende, guarding their ways, their suffering, their trust. He was a man caught between two rivers, the current of his Apache life, strong and vital, the undertow of his forgotten white heritage unexpectedly powerful. The antagonists quickly emerged from the shadows. Mayor Josiah Thorne, a florid, ambitious man who saw the Apache presence as an impediment to redemption's growth and his own enrichment, openly scoffed at the notion of Carver's son returning as an Apache chief. "A likely story, Carver," he'd boomed in the town saloon. "More like a savage's trick. He's playing you for a fool, and all of us too. The only good Apache is a dead Apache, son or no son." Thorne's rhetoric fanned the flames of fear and prejudice among many settlers. On the Apache side, a young, fiery warrior named Chaka, he who fights bear, who had always been wary of Taza's more measured approach, saw this revelation as a sign of weakness, a taint. "His blood is white," Chaka argued in council. his heart will betray us to his own kind. How can he lead us when he is one of them? Taja found himself walking a razor's edge. He had to prove his loyalty to the ND, who were his family, his people, while simultaneously navigating the treacherous currents of the white man's world, a world he barely remembered, but whose language and some of its customs were slowly, uncomfortably, returning to him. He made small inroads. He negotiated for meager supplies for his people: flour, blankets, a few tools, in exchange for promises of peace, promises that felt increasingly fragile. He showed flashes of the boy Ethan, a shared memory with John of a particular song his mother used to hum, a half-forgotten scar on his hand from a childhood accident on the ranch that John remembered with a fresh pang of grief. These moments were like tiny, flickering candles in a vast darkness, offering a glimmer of hope but little real illumination on the path forward. John Carver, meanwhile, was a man reborn in torment. The return of his son, not as the innocent boy he'd lost but as a hardened Apache leader, was a miracle wrapped in layers of impossibility and pain. His gruff exterior began to crack, revealing the raw, vulnerable heart of a father. He defended Taja fiercely against Thorn's accusations, earning himself suspicion and scorn from some of his own people. He saw the leader in his son, the strength, the wisdom, but he also ached for the boy, for the lost years, for the connection that seemed just out of reach. He would watch Taja interact with his warriors, the easy camaraderie, the respect he commanded, and a strange mixture of pride and profound alienation would wash over him. This was his son, flesh of his flesh, yet a stranger forged in a fire he could only imagine. A stolen horse, attributed to the Apache, brought tensions to a boiling point. Thorn seized upon it, demanding retribution. Taja, knowing his people were innocent of this particular theft, had to use all his authority, all his diplomatic skill, to prevent Chaka from leading a retaliatory raid. He managed to find the real culprits, a pair of drifters, and returned the horse, but the incident left a bitter taste, further eroding trust. He was learning that bridging two worlds was not a task of building a simple span, but of navigating a treacherous, shifting landscape of fear, prejudice, and deeply ingrained hatred, a landscape where one wrong step could plunge everyone into the abyss. The weight of his dual identity, of the expectations of two peoples, pressed down on him, a crushing burden that threatened to extinguish the very resilience that had allowed him to survive. He was Soaring Hawk, leader of the ND. He was Ethan Carver, a rancher's lost son. He was neither. He was both. And the path ahead was shrouded in a storm of his own making, and of a history that refused to stay buried. The fragile piece, if it could even be called that, shattered like sun-baked earth under a hammer blow. Mayor Thorn, impatient with the slow pace of Taja's negotiations and fueled by a potent cocktail of greed and xenophobia, saw his opportunity to escalate the situation beyond diplomacy. He needed the Apache gone, their ancestral lands opened for settlement, and, more importantly, for the rumored gold seams in the foothills they currently occupied. A lone prospector was found dead near the Apache camp, his small claim ransacked. Though the signs pointed away from an Apache attack, the killing was clumsy, driven by robbery, not ND warfare. Thorn immediately declared it an act of savagery, a brutal violation of their supposed truce. This is what happens when you parley with fiends, he thundered from the steps of Redemption's newly built courthouse, his voice resonating with righteous fury, expertly whipping the already fearful townsfolk into a frenzy. Carver's son has shown his true colors. They understand only one language, the language of force. John Carver, his face grim, tried to argue, to inject reason into the rising tide of hysteria, but his words were drowned out by cries for vengeance. He saw the trap Thorn was laying, a deliberate provocation designed to force Taja's hand. Deep within the Apache camp, Chaka, the ambitious warrior, saw the prospector's death not as a tragedy, but as a sign. Soaring Hawk's soft words have brought us nothing but more white-eyes treachery, he argued passionately to the other warriors, his voice ringing with conviction. They kill one of theirs and blame us. They will not stop until we are all dead or driven into the barren lands. We must strike first, show them the strength of the Ende before they encircle us. Taja found himself caught in a closing vice. His people were agitated, hungry, and increasingly swayed by Chaka's militant rhetoric. The settlers, inflamed by Thorn, were arming themselves, their eyes filled with hatred and fear. His attempts to investigate the prospector's death were rebuffed by Thorn, who declared the case closed, the Apache guilty. The path to peaceful coexistence, already a narrow, treacherous track, seemed to have vanished completely. He was faced with a terrible decision: to lead his people in a war he knew they could not win. A war that would mean the annihilation of the End and countless deaths on both sides, or to somehow find another way, a way that might brand him a coward in the eyes of his warriors and a fool in the eyes of the settlers. The weight of Kael'te's final words, "You walk two paths. Do not fear the pattern. It is your strength," pressed heavily upon him. What strength could there be in this impossible situation? He retreated into himself, seeking guidance not in the counsel of agitated men, but in the silence of the ancient Nde ways, in the whispering wind, in the steadfast gaze of the stars that had witnessed countless generations of his adopted people. He remembered his early years, the fear, the loneliness, but also the unexpected kindness of Nalin, the stern but fair teachings of Kaelte. He remembered the core values of the Nd. Courage, yes, but also wisdom, endurance, and a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of all things. And then, slowly, an idea began to form, a desperate gamble, a path that was neither total war nor passive surrender, but something far more complex, far more dangerous. He would use his unique position, his knowledge of both worlds, not to fight, but to expose the truth, to appeal not to the hardened hearts of men like Thorn and Chaka, but to the sliver of conscience that he prayed still existed in others. His plan required a level of trust that seemed non-existent, a willingness to make himself incredibly vulnerable. He approached his father, John Carver, not as Soaring Hawk, Apache leader, but as Ethan, his son. He found John in the dilapidated barn, mending a piece of tack, his shoulders slumped, the weight of the world upon him. "Father," Taja began, the word still feeling foreign yet strangely right on his tongue. "Thorn is lying. My people did not kill that man. He seeks to drive us into a fight so he can claim our land." John looked up, his eyes, usually so guarded, now raw with worry and a flicker of something Taja hadn't seen in them before, a desperate, paternal protectiveness. "I know, son, I know, but they won't listen to me. They're mad with fear." Taja outlined his plan. It was audacious. He would go into redemption, unarmed, not as a warrior chief demanding justice, but as Ethan Carver, a man seeking to clear his name and the name of his people. He would present evidence he had quietly gathered, inconsistencies at the murder scene, a witness who had seen two unfamiliar white men near the prospector's claim shortly before his death, evidence Thorn had dismissed out of hand. He would appeal directly to the townsfolk, to their sense of fairness, if any remained. John was aghast. "They'll lynch you, Ethan. Thorn will see to it." "It's suicide." "Perhaps," Taja conceded, his voice calm, betraying none of the cold fear that snaked around his own heart. "But if we fight, we all die. My people, your people. This is the only way I see to stop the bloodshed before it begins. I need you to speak for me, to prepare the ground, to find those few who might still listen to reason before Thorn's poison corrupts them completely." John argued, pleaded, but saw the unshakable resolve in his son's eyes, the same stubborn determination he recognized in himself, the determination that had allowed Ethan to survive 20 years among the Apache. Reluctantly, fearfully, he agreed. The confrontation was set for the next day, in the town square. Word spread like wildfire. Chaka, furious at Taja's decision, accused him of betrayal, of walking willingly into the enemy's trap. You are no longer Nde, he spat. You are one of them now. He tried to rally warriors to his side, to preempt Taja's move with an attack of their own, but many were hesitant, their loyalty to Taja, their chosen leader, still holding, however tenuously. The air was electric with anticipation, as Taja, dressed not in Apache buckskins, but in simple borrowed settler clothes that felt alien and constricting, rode into redemption. He was alone, as promised, his hands empty, his face set in a mask of calm resolve. John Carver stood waiting for him, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt, his old eyes scanning the crowd that had gathered, a grim, silent sentinel. Mayor Thorne was there, a smirk playing on his lips, flanked by his own armed supporters, confident that his plan was reaching its inevitable, violent conclusion. The climax was not a battle of bullets and arrows, but a battle of wills, of words, of courage against prejudice. Taja, Ethan, stood before the hostile crowd, the silence broken only by mutters and the nervous shuffling of feet. His voice, when he began to speak, was not the commanding tone of a war chief, but the earnest plea of a man seeking truth. He laid out his evidence, piece by painstaking piece. He spoke of his life, of the Nde's desire for peace, of the web of lies Thorne had spun. He spoke with a quiet dignity, his gaze sweeping over them, meeting their hostility with an unnerving stillness. Thorne interjected, his voice dripping with sarcasm, trying to discredit him, to incite the crowd. But John Carver stepped forward, his voice rough but firm, vouching for his son, his words carrying the weight of his long-standing, if grudging, respect within the community. And then, a small miracle, a woman, the widow of a man Taja, had once helped when her wagon broke down, spoke up, her voice trembling but clear, attesting to his kindness. Another, a merchant who had traded fairly with the ND under Taja's leadership, spoke of his honor. Slowly, hesitantly, other voices joined, small cracks appearing in the wall of Thorne's manufactured outrage. The turning point came when Taja directly addressed the deep-seated fear of the other. "Look at me," he said, his voice resonating with a profound shared humanity. "I have been Apache. I have been white. I have seen hatred and kindness in both peoples. We are not so different. We all seek peace, a place to call home, a future for our children. Is this land not big enough for all of us, if we choose understanding over fear, truth over lies?" His words, spoken with such earnest conviction, began to sway the undecided, to shame the easily led. Thorne, seeing his control slipping, grew desperate, his accusations becoming wilder, more transparently self-serving. It was then that the two drifters, the real killers of the prospector, nervous about the shifting mood and perhaps fearing exposure, tried to slip away from the edge of the crowd. But John Carver, his eyes missing nothing, pointed them out. A brief scuffle, and they were apprehended, their guilt quickly becoming apparent under pointed questioning from some of the more sober-minded townsmen. The edifice of Thorne's accusations crumbled. The crowd, moments before a lynch mob in the making, now turned their anger and disgust upon the mayor, who stood exposed, his greed and duplicity laid bare. Chaka, who had watched from a distance with a handful of his warriors, saw not a traitor, but a leader of immense courage, a man who had risked everything, not with weapons, but with truth. The immediate crisis was averted, not by bloodshed, but by a single man's willingness to bridge the chasm between two warring worlds, armed only with his conviction and the complex tapestry of his own fractured, yet ultimately whole, identity. The aftermath of Mayor Thorne's disgrace was not an immediate dawn of idyllic peace, but rather the fragile, uncertain light that follows a violent storm. The clouds of hatred and suspicion had been momentarily dispersed by Taja's courageous stand, but the landscape of mistrust, carved by generations of conflict, remained deeply scarred. Thorne, his political ambitions and reputation in ruins, slunk away from redemption under a pall of public contempt, his departure creating a power vacuum that, for a time, left the settlement rudderless but also open to new, less prejudiced voices. Chaka, humbled and profoundly moved by Taja's bravery and wisdom in choosing a path of truth over reflexive violence, approached his leader not with defiance, but with a newfound respect. He offered his loyalty, not blindly, but with an understanding that true strength lay not just in the warrior's arm, but in the leader's heart and mind. This reconciliation within the Ende was a crucial first step, solidifying Taza's position and allowing him to speak with a more unified voice for his people. The immediate threat of starvation and annihilation had receded, but the future of the Ende remained precarious. Taja, now accepted, if uneasily, by many settlers as Ethan Carver as well as Soaring Hawk, entered into new negotiations, not with liars and demagogues, but with a council of redemption's more moderate citizens, including some who had been swayed by his actions in the town square. John Carver, his eyes holding a light that had been extinguished for 2 decades, stood steadfastly by his son's side, his presence a silent endorsement, his knowledge of the land and the white man's laws proving invaluable. The discussions were long, arduous, and fraught with the ghosts of past betrayals. There were no easy answers, no sweeping solutions. The dream of vast, unfettered Apache lands was gone, a casualty of relentless westward expansion. But Taja fought, not for a return to an impossible past, but for a viable future. He negotiated for a tract of land, smaller than their ancestral territories but fertile enough, with access to water, a place where the Ende could rebuild their lives, not as prisoners on a reservation, but as a community with a measure of autonomy. A place where they could preserve their traditions while adapting to the changing world. It was a compromise, a painful one for many of his people, who yearned for the freedom of the old ways, but it was a chance for survival, a chance for their children to grow without the constant shadow of war and starvation. He secured agreements for fair trade, for protection against land-hungry speculators, for the right to hunt in certain designated areas. These were not grand pronouncements of eternal brotherhood, but small, practical steps, painstakingly achieved, each one a testament to his patience, his resilience, and his unique ability to see the world through 2 sets of eyes. John Carver found a new purpose in these endeavors. The bitterness that had encrusted his heart for so long began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet pride in the man his son had become. Their relationship, once a source of unimaginable pain and then bewildering conflict, slowly transformed into one of deep, albeit unconventional, love and mutual respect. They would often sit together in the evenings, on the porch of the old ranch house, which John was slowly, with Ethan's occasional help, bringing back to life. They wouldn't always speak much. Words often seemed inadequate to span the chasm of their separate experiences. But in the shared silence, in the understanding that passed between them, a profound connection was forged. John learned about the Ende, their beliefs, their struggles, and saw not savages, but a people of profound dignity and resilience. Ethan, in turn, reconnected with fragments of his childhood, with the love of the parents he had lost and found again in different forms. He would never be fully Ethan Carver, the rancher's son, nor solely Soaring Hawk, the Apache leader. He was both, and in embracing this duality, he found his unique strength, his purpose. He became a bridge, not just between 2 peoples, but between past and future, tradition and adaptation. His life was a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to survive, to adapt, to find meaning even in the face of unimaginable loss and division. The resolution was not a fairy tale ending. Prejudice did not vanish overnight. There were still those, on both sides, who harbored suspicion and hatred. Small conflicts would continue to flare up, testing the fragile peace. But a foundation had been laid, a seed of understanding planted in the harsh soil of the borderlands. Taja, Ethan, would often ride out to a high bluff overlooking the valley where the Two Forks Creek met the larger river. the place where his two worlds had so dramatically collided, and then, slowly, begun to converge. He would look out at the ND settlement, taking shape in the distance, at the lights of redemption twinkling in the twilight, at his father's ranch nestled in its familiar hollow, and a sense of quiet solace would fill him. The scars remained, on his soul and on the land, but they were no longer just symbols of pain, but also markers of resilience, of battles fought and, sometimes, unexpectedly, won not through war, but through the courage to understand. He knew his path would always be a challenging one, walking the line between two worlds, but he no longer feared the pattern Keolte had spoken of. It was indeed his strength, his destiny, a complex, beautiful, and uniquely American tapestry woven from threads of sorrow and joy, loss and reunion, conflict, and the enduring hope for peace. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and gentle lavender, he would feel the spirits of his ancestors, Ende and White, whispering their approval on the evening breeze, a benediction for the man who had dared to listen to the song of both rivers, and in doing so, had found his own. The journey had been long, the cost immense, but here, at the confluence of two mighty currents, a new beginning was flowing, a testament to the enduring possibility of connection in a fractured world. Now, as you reflect on Ethan's story, on Soaring Hawk's journey, consider the divides in your own world, the chasms of misunderstanding that separate people, communities, even nations. Think about the courage it takes to bridge such divides, to listen to those whose experiences are vastly different from your own, to find the common humanity that lies beneath the surface of our differences. Ethan's path was one of immense struggle, but also of profound growth and eventual, if imperfect, reconciliation. What can his story teach us about resilience, identity, and the relentless pursuit of peace, even in the face of overwhelming adversity? Perhaps it reminds us that true strength is not always found in confrontation, but in the quiet courage to understand, to forgive, and to build bridges where others see only walls. What are your thoughts on Ethan's choices? How might his story resonate with the challenges we face today? We invite you to share your reflections in the comments below, to like this video if it moved you, and to subscribe for more stories that explore the depths of the human spirit and the enduring power of hope. Your voice is part of this ongoing conversation, a conversation that, like Ethan's journey, seeks to find connection and understanding in a world that desperately needs both.